In this video, we're going to go through changing direct and partial variation situations. So we're going to look at various examples, talk about partial and direct variation, come up with equations. Okay. So in example 1, it says determine whether each graph represents a direct variation or partial variation or neither. Give some reasons for your answer. So if I look at the first one, if you recall from the previous lesson, as soon as my graph goes through 0, 0, that's my point right there. That's a direct variation. So this is a direct variation because the graph goes through the origin. Remember our origin is 0, 0. Okay. This one is neither because it's not linear. In order for it to be direct or partial, it has to be a linear relationship. And lastly, we have what's called a partial variation. Because it doesn't start at 0, 0, it starts at 5, 0, and 5. Okay. So example 2 is determine whether each situation is a direct variation or partial, and then we're going to write an equation to represent the situation. So remember, partial variations, when our independent is 0, our dependent or our y is not 0. Whereas for direct variations where our independent is 0, the dependent will be 0. As soon as you have a fixed cost, that's going to tell you it's partial. So bowling costs a fixed cost of $10. So that's right there, tells me my vertical intercept. And in this one, so bowling costs a fixed cost of $10 for a lane plus $5 for each hour. And this is my slope because it's for each hour. So again, it's partial variation because it has a fixed cost. Okay, so you have a starting cost of $10. Okay. Then in order to create an equation, you have to define a variable. So I'm going to use x and y for most of these. I'm going to say y, let y represent the total cost. And I'm going to let x represent the number of hours, because those are our new two unknowns. Okay, so basically y is equal to, and this is how we start. You can either start with the slope or you can start with the starting value, the fixed cost. So here's my fixed cost. So it costs me $10 automatically, plus I have to pay $5 for each hour. So that's how the equation looks. Or you can write it like this, the other way around with the slope first, plus $10. So that's your first example. Now if you look at purchasing items at the dollar store, it costs $1 per item. Is there a fixed cost? Do you have to pay anything just for going to the dollar store in general? No. So there's no fixed cost. Therefore, it's direct variation. Okay, so we're gonna use an x and a y. Our y usually we like to use for our dependent, so we're gonna let y represent your total cost. It's our dependent. That's what we're talking about. And then we're gonna let x represent the number of items. So my total cost, y, is equal to 1 times x. So x would be how many items I'm buying, and 1 is my $1. So I can find out any total cost once I know how many items I'm buying. Another example, Olivia withdraws 25 withdraws. I mean, she's taking out money, $25 a week from her account for spending money. She had 600 at the beginning of the year. So this is going to be partial variation because you're starting off with an amount of $600. So I'm going to let y be how much I have in my bank account, or Olivia's bank account. Because that's my dependent. And my independent is, I'm going to use x, and that's just how many weeks go by. So we're going to use an equation, y equals to, because that's my dependent, how much is in her account, and that depends on how many weeks go by. So she starts off with 600, and she's taking out, so it's minus $25 times how many weeks. Yes. So that's some equations, how do you create them? We're going to look at some more examples. Okay, so the given table shows Justin's earnings. Is this a partial variation or a direct variation? So in our previous video, we knew from a table of values that when you see 0, 0, that automatically tells you that it goes through the origin, which means that it's a direct variation. So it's a direct variation because it goes through the origin. Okay. Then it asks us to write an equation. Okay, so to write an equation, we need two things. Okay, we need the slope and we need a fixed cost. Okay, so let's think about it. How am I going to get slope? I don't have a graph, but what I do have is I can look at my points to get my rise over run. Remember, you can pick any 2 points. So I can use 0, 0, and the second point. Then I can recall the equation, the y2 minus y1. I like to label my points. So basically my rise is subtracting how much of a difference between my y values. So when you use 0, 0, it's nice and easy because you're just going to subtract your y2 from your y1 and your x2 from your x1. So 23.5 subtract 0, and then you have 2 minus 0. And you end up with 23.5 divided by 2, which is 11.75. Think about it, this is how much he makes per hour. Okay. So to set in my equation, remember, we're going to let y, we'd like to use y for dependent, how much he makes. So let y represent the amount earned. And then we're going to let x represent the number of hours worked. So remember y, our dependent, so how much she makes, equal to our slope, 11.75, times how much they make, our independent. And is there a fixed cost? There's no fixed cost, so I don't have to worry about anything else. Stop there for this lesson.